Ruti Abelyovich is Assistant Professor of Theater and Performance Studies at the University of Haifa. She's the author of Possessed Voices, Oral Remains from Modernist Hebrew Theater, a great and fantastic book, and has published articles in the journal TDR, Theater Journal, Performance Research, Theater Research International, Journal of Classical Sociology. In 2020, she received a European Research Council, ERC, starting grant to pursue research on the popular Yiddish theater 1880 and 1920. Ruti, the floor is yours, and thank you for organizing this amazing conference.
Thank you, Diego. Okay, so my connection seems to be a bit problematic. So if it goes down, first of all, I might allocate another co-host just to make sure that this meeting doesn't break off. And if it breaks down, and if my connection fails, then I'll just have to move to another computer. So bear with us. Okay, so I'll start. Performed in the United States, published in Poland. So one of the truisms often reiterated about the Yiddish theater at the turn of the century submits that this was a global enterprise. Theater scholars such as David Stern, Edna Nachshon, Joel Berkowitz, Deborah Kaplan, Nina Vanke, and more recently Tovo Markinson have demonstrated how the mass Jewish migration movement at the turn of the 20th century transfigured traditional wandering Jewish performers into theater transmigrants, traveling back and forth between continents, dismantling a disseminating a fixed shared repertoire across the enclaves of Jewish migration. In the following, I wish to question this paradigm by nuancing its forms of global transmission. The title of my paper, Performed in the US, published in Poland, relates to the circulation of Yiddish dramatic works. I wish to highlight a cultural context as well as the difference in theatrical modes of transmission between two prominent Jewish diasporic centers. I'm interested in the concrete aspects as well as the symbolic dimensions of the relationship between the flourishing theater scene in the United States and its journey to Eastern Europe. In the following, I will engage with the migration of dramatic text from the Golden Medina and the reproductions as booklets published in the Alterheim. I wish to understand how this journey across the Atlantic Ocean informed the images and fictions of people and text, and how it changed theatrical forms, themes, and practices. On a broader and more theoretical level, this case study can perhaps also reveal to us something about the relationship between modes of travel and the search for a profound sense of origin, belonging, and rootedness. So modern Yiddish theater evolved in relation to Jewish socio-political changes. It gained momentum in 1876 in Romania with the wake of Abraham Goldfaden and his group of actors and musicians. Thereafter, the genre rapidly expanded to the Russian Empire, Eastern Europe, and later, alongside waves of migration, it was imported to New York, transforming from a regional phenomena into a transnational entertainment network. The Yiddish theater was extremely popular. It produced a staggering volume of theatrical entertainment. In the following, I will only center on the works of Joseph Latiner. This includes a prodigious body of dramatic and musical works performed throughout the Pale of Settlement, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the US. Latiner began producing theater in Romania, from where he traveled east to the Russian Empire, producing theater wherever he could. In 1884, following the Tsar's ban to perform Jewish theater in the Russian Empire, he emigrated to New York, where he mostly composed and produced musical theater plays. In an informed process of translation, appropriation, and adaptation of familiar plots, European music, and canonical dramas, mobilizing biblical stories or Jewish folklore onto the popular stage, Lateiner created a distinctly Jewish body of work that closely communicated with its surrounding culture. As Nina Warnke had explained, in 1890, New York was the world center of Yiddish theater activity. Theater makers, playwrights, and actors from Eastern Europe were magnetized to the city's show business that catered a large audience hungry for entertainment. Soon enough, the New York repertoire, as theater historian B. Gorin writes, became the spiritual food for all other Yiddish theater in the world. And accordingly, America began to be the principal supplier and the trendsetter for a commercially viable Yiddish theater repertoire. And in this slide, you can see, this slide refers only to Lateiner's plays, and it refers to the theaters that performed his plays between 1884 and until his death. So you can see that. You can get a grip of the large volume of plays that were performed. Around 1890, American Yiddish plays began to appear across Europe, and this is very nice. You can see the spread of the appearance of Yiddish drama in Poland. The political liberalization of 1905 enabled the Yiddish theater to flourish again, resulting in an increased need for new plays and the publication of dramatic texts. By that time, Lateiner had already produced successful operettas in the US. And while he himself was situated in New York, his works traveled to the Eastern Europe and catered the European audiences. Lateiner's drama arrived in Poland through unofficial channels, smuggled in the luggages of traveling actors, prompters, and musicians, moving between various Jewish centers. The study of modern Jewish theater is often focused on the trajectory from Eastern Europe and Central Europe to America and Palestine. This trajectory marks a symbolic transition from the old traditional world to the new promising land. The arrival, community building, and assimilation of Jewish migrants has been extensively studied. And while this was undoubtedly a central trajectory, Jewish theater enables us to examine the reverse direction, the traveling and return of Jews from their migratory home countries back to their old homes. By 1880, migrants enjoyed much more comfort and safety in their travels, and fatal accidents became rare. Governments in different countries began to regulate the mass transport more strictly, imposing minimum requirements for hygiene and on the steamships and general safety regulations. The journey from Eastern Europe to the Americas and back was thus relatively safe and could be covered in a little more than 3 weeks. This enabled theater makers to travel during the summers and especially during off-season when theaters in New York were not operating, and then to travel back to Eastern Europe. Tracing the root of Lateiner's drama reveals the story of a theater that was written in America by European migrants who then traveled back to their homeland in Eastern Europe, bringing with them their new culture. The transmigration of Yiddish theater enables us to trace the circulation of theater performances, their alterations and mode of production, and how these negotiated and performed modern Jewish identity. It also enables us to think of what the philosopher and literary critic Edouard Glissant terms the poetic of relations, in which each identity is extended through a relationship with the other. For Glissant, thinking of migration, travel, and errantry is thinking about relations. Drawing from Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's concept of the rhizome, Glissant criticizes the idea of the root, as well as the notion of being rooted. In contrast to the idiosyncratic one-source origin, Glissant proposes to think of the movement across a network as a significant gesture of identity building. The global dissemination of the popular Yiddish theater was built upon a network of actors, musicians, and prompters extending across the Atlantic Ocean. The repertoire they brought into the Polish Jewish theater scene, mostly between 1896 and 1906, constituted mostly of operettas, melodramas, and comedies, and domestic plays dealing with daily or daily current political and national affairs, as well as episodes from Jewish history, biblical stories, and myths. On a meta level, this was a repertoire that staged cross-cultural contacts, enabling its audiences to process through drama and music the rapid changes brought by uprooting and mass migration. In other words, this is a repertoire that focused on movement and errantry. The idea that identity is not entirely within the roots, but also in the relation between places and social positions looms large from the transmigration of Yiddish theater from the US to Eastern Europe, demonstrating how uprooting can work towards identity when it is experienced as a search for another. So this is a map that shows publication centers in Poland around Warsaw and Krakow also. And on the right, you can see the publishers and the printers that handled these performances, that published these performances, of course, without the approval of Lateiner himself, and the printers that printed his material. And indeed, some popular plays were also vended to publishing houses in Warsaw and in the periphery that printed and sold Yiddish drama. The publication of Yiddish drama was not initiated by the playwright, as we know that Lateiner was not involved in the European reproduction of his work. These dramas were published without the permission of their author. In other words, they were stolen. Who then was capable of replicating the entire dramatic text of a performance? Actors and prompters who knew the roles by heart and could reproduce the roles of the dramatic persona and the stage directions. Performers that memorized these texts and performed them. The text published in Poland may seem at a glance to obtain more authority than these printed and published officially and distributed, and thus had a wider dissemination and were used more often. And of course, as historical artifacts, we tend to take more seriously the printed text than the handwritten ones. This introduces us to a process that intervenes in the common way we're used to think of theatrical reproduction, that is not from page to stage, but with a reverse movement from oral transmission to a written form. The dynamic, varied performative nature of Lateiner's repertoire is manifested by the apparent changes in the plays when staged in Europe. Lateiner's play, Die Verblondete Neshome, was first staged in the US in 1895 and later in Europe under a different name, Sora Sheindel, insinuating a false connection to Sholem Aleichem. It was published by Yud Lidsky Publishing House in Warsaw in 1902. The play Gabriel oder die Liebe von a Jiddische Freu was first staged in 1901 as an adaptation of a German play titled Was eine Freu kann. It was also staged under the name Gabriel der Moller, and when it arrived to Europe, it gained an immense popularity and was published in 1907 in Warsaw under the name Chimke, Pinke oder Gabriel der Moller by the Yiddish Theater Bibliothek book series. There were also alterations in the plays. For example, Lateiner's play Churban Yerushalayim that premiered in January 1st, 1890 in New York with music by Minovsky, was later staged in Europe with music by Leo Liov and Yitzhak Schlossberg, and was published in Warsaw by the Yiddish Theater Bibliothek in 1908. So positioning dramatic text within their historical context, one that incorporates their mode of transmission as a central aspect of their significance, presents us with a trajectory of a cultural exchange and transformation between diasporas. This route across the Atlantic reproduces the track of circular nomadism in which no place and every place is home. It makes every periphery into an ad hoc center. And by doing so, it enables us to look beyond notions of cultural center or periphery into the movements that established them. Yiddish actors and prompters connected the two parts of the Atlantic through theater. They used the theatrical medium as a mode of transmission and communication. As traveling liminal figures, with each of their feet positioned in two very different worlds and not quite belonging to neither, constantly changing identities on the stage and beyond, they themselves operated as mediums. A further investigation will strip the theater agents that brought these plays to Europe out of their anonymity, trace their concrete trajectories, and delve deeper into the nuances and differences between the European and the American context, in the shaping of the drama, the performance and language, as well as the reception and spectatorship habits. So I have lots more work on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruti. So we'll have now 10 minutes for questions and discussions and remarks. You can raise your hand, open your mic. Tafi.
Very innocent question. But maybe the concept of origin or center or one coherent identity didn't disappear, but it's changed. And as what happened with Heinrich Heine or other modernists before or after him, language and characters and other new criteria became, to be the new center, other than places, other than, I don't know, national, ethnic identities or other former centers. So maybe it's still a relevant concept, but it changed, its meaning changed.
Thank you, Tafi. This brings us a bit to Diego's idea of the stage as a home, right? Not the nation or not the environment, but the actual medium and what happens on the stage as a home. That's interesting.
So the stage and the language and characters and some habits, and I think it's a whole full and very rich world.
Although I think that one of the things that I'm interesting is also showing the difference. Also to show the difference between the sort of theater that was produced in America and the theater that was produced in Eastern Europe, in the Russian Empire, in Poland. I think that looking at the Yiddish theater as one phenomena, as if everyone staged Goldfaden or everyone staged Lutainer, can be a bit more nuanced and perhaps maybe reveal also differences. And I think that what I tried to show, or what I'm sort of inclined to go towards, is also to show the difference in forms of knowledge. so Warsaw at the time was, of course, a very successful and prolific publication center, and the Yiddish theater also connected to that sort of trend, but it also turned these plays into something else, maybe. Hi, Marcus.
Other questions or remarks? I was thinking also, Ruti, that also we can think about this transnational web, or also in theater and literature, but also it can be thought maybe following Szydlowski's idea of Yiddishland, this, you know, this parallel idea of transnational and the other possibility to approach all this territoriality in another way, as one expanded land. Or I was coming now from the Odin theater, so he was thinking about the theater on island as a theater wall, as a type of archipelago. So you know, I think that those tensions can be also other ways to think about this web, this theater web.
But Diego, why do we want to think about the one? That's basically what I'm trying to ask. Why do we want to think about the global, the one, the unifying?
I think that what I think is that there is one language with all the variation that is actually making, it's a language and it's a tradition that is actually connecting. So there is something that it's one with differences, of course, but that is connecting the different cultures, territories, lands, states. So I'm saying that it's not the only way. So it's another way to think. Maybe, I don't know. It's just an idea. Galit or Freddy, I don't know who is.
Galit, we can't hear you. Maybe you need to. Yes.
Can you hear me now? You really need to enter this computer in order to be heard. First of all, thank you for an illuminating talk, Ruti. I want to ask you whether you think it's specifically characteristic of Jewish or Yiddish theater, this moving thing, or whether it's a phenomenon of theater as a medium. As you know, there were moving theater groups all over Europe from very early on, right? So how much of it do you attribute to the fact of Jewish culture as a roving, as a diaspora, as a wandering culture, and how much do you attribute to the phenomenon of theater per se?
Thank you, Galit. I think that in a way it's an example of diasporic and traveling theater. We can see parallel phenomena in the end of the 19th century in many other with many other theater makers, of course. I think that the shared plots, the subjects of the plays, and of course the language, is what makes it Jewish. And I think that I'm interested in a way to see how people from the same culture tell the same stories in different ways.
David, do you want?
And also Marcus, Diego. Marcus was first.
Okay.
I didn't see the hand. Or yes. Okay, Marcus and David.
Okay, sorry for coming late, but I have a lot of duties here, and I am sorry, really. But I am only addressing the last your remark, Diego. Your last remark. I think that the question is not either or. The question is both, and we have to take, when you are elaborating this point, we have to take into consideration both axes.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. David, last question, and we will continue with the panel.
I just wanted, it was very interesting that Ruth, you pointed at the prompters as the people that the suspects, the ones who are in charge of the unauthorized Eastern European editions. I must, first of all, this is very intriguing. If we could identify, I'm wondering if you have already identified some of them, and that's another new history of Jewish theater, not just the directors and the actors, but the prompters. So we're going farther into the margins. It just reminded, I'm just thinking, they're not though the only suspects, because if I recall well, there's a story in the film, Arnon Goldfinger's film, Komödiantin, with Israel Becker, who if I'm not mistaken, who confesses that he was the one who had such a good memory that he could then reproduce the whole play just from being on the side of the audience. So that makes, of course, our investigation more complex, but I love this kind of mystery of finding the root of how and of course not, and also the way, I'm sure it's not always 100%. Maybe you can say more, a word or two about this. It's not that changes have been made, and what changes and who makes them, and all this transmission is probably a little more complex than just copy paste process.
Definitely. So yes, I'm also intrigued about the prompters, and also about the poetic and symbolic aspects of a prompter. You know, this person that stands underneath the stage and whispers the whole text as a form of cultural transmission. So this is very intriguing. I haven't yet located the specific prompters. I hope we could manage to identify them as we go along, as we progress with this project. There are very clear differences in the text. They're not only technical differences, there are also differences in the shaping of the language, in the degree of its Germanization, in the names, and sometimes in the characterizations of the dramatic persona. So these are very similar texts, but they're definitely not identical. And I think that your thought about the audience is also very interesting. I need to look into that. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and thanks, Ruti, for this great opening for the event. I will present now Agata Dąbrowska, an assistant professor at the Faculty of International and Political Studies at the University of Łódź, scholarship holder including Foundation for Polish Science, Rothschild Foundation, Hannah Div, Europe, and the Norwegian Council of Science, author of several articles and book chapters devoted to the reception of Yiddish theater in Poland, including The Wandering Star, The Life and Work of Avram Morewski, Theatrical Activity of Jewish Elites in Occupied Poland in 1939-1945, or My Life, My Theater, The Voice of Ida Kaminska on the War, the Holocaust, and the March events, and the editor of Polish Shakespearean Bibliography 2001-2010. She's currently finishing her book devoted to Shakespearean inspiration in Yiddish theater in Poland, in the context of Jewish-Polish, Polish-Jewish, and Jewish-Jewish relations. And the title of her talk today is Yiddish Theater in Poland in Polish National Discourse. Welcome, Agata, to Israel.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure for me to give this short lecture. Actually, I'm analyzing the Yiddish theater in the anti-Semitic discourse in Poland. So just to clarify. So the establishment of the Jewish theater, particularly one staging works in Yiddish, met with negative reactions from Polish nationalist circles who didn't regard this as a piece of art. For example, the journalist of Warsaw Postęp, it was the daily which mission was to defend the Polish Christian and Catholic people against Jewish exploitation, were critical of the development of the Yiddish theater. The journalist claimed that Jewish jargon theater, instead of promoting education, it drowns in a swamp of darkness, exaggeration, and contempt for Christians. The critics of Postęp referred to the Yiddish theater as a shabby art of the Jewish ghetto or art in lingo, questioning as well the artistic quality of actors performing in Yiddish theaters. Polish opponents of the Yiddish culture claimed also that Yiddish theater, instead of, quote, teaching good manners, popularized white instincts among its spectators. So, for example, outraged reviewers of the Łódź Daily Rozwój reported that Yiddish theater goers, who were mostly poor and uneducated people, were not interested in theatrical productions at all, but they mainly focused on drinking alcohol, arguing about the seats, or consuming sausages and goose meat during performances. Moreover, on many occasions, as the Polish nationalist circles mentioned, the police had to appease the furious crowd gathered in front of the Yiddish theaters. So here we have an example. This is how the premiere of Shulamis ended up in 1897 in Selin's Garden in Łódź. It was stated in the Daily Rozwój that before entering the theater, the raging crowd beat the cashier, mauled the janitors, trampled flower beds, and broke the railings in order to get inside the theater. The negative image of the Yiddish theater presented in Polish nationalist press contributed to create its stereotype as an institution that inhibited the process of assimilation of Jews with Poles, and as well deepened cultural differences between those two nations. The journalists of the Polish right-wing press were convinced of the necessity to combat the jargon theater, seeing it as a decomposing element of Polish culture and preventing its full revival just after the First World War. So, for example, Teodor Jeske-Choiński, one of the leading nationalist critics of the Daily Kraj and Głos Warszawski, warned that Yiddish theater fought against Polishness and deepened separatism and hate between Poles and Jews. The same argument was presented in Warsaw Gazeta Warszawska. It was admitted that every nation had the right to express its culture in their own language, but at the same time, the question was asked, what actually Jewish jargon, that is a mixture of German, Russian, and Romanian languages, had in common with Polish Jews. So just to sum up this section, the Jewish language, according to many Polish nationalists, was not regarded as the national or ethnic language of the Jews, but rather as a dialect or German jargon. It's worth to mention that Polish nationalists were very skeptical as well of the literary value of dramas staged in Yiddish theaters. Here I just enumerated some of the examples. So the plays of Gordin, such as Mirelle Efros or Gott, Mensch und Teufel, Shalom Ashes, Gott von Nekome, or Dybbuk by Anski, were described as anti-Polish and anti-Catholic works, products of a Jewish mind expressed in jargon, or apotheosis of the Jewish wrong values. Those opinions were shared by many Polish nationalist journalists. And for example, Wanda Stanisławska argued in the right-wing Dziennik Wileński that works by Gordin and Ash were inconsistent with the Polish national spirit because their authors expressed hatred in their works, insulted Poland, insulted Poles, and as well promote pornographic and sadistic moods. This last comment refers, of course, to the God of Vengeance by Shalom Ash. The aversion to the Yiddish theater in Poland increased especially in the interwar period and was used to conduct an anti-Jewish campaign. Many performances staged in Yiddish often become a pretext for organizing fights and anti-Jewish demonstrations. And for example, during the premiere of the death penalty at the Scala Theater in Warsaw 20s, there were scuffles in the audience between left-wing anarchists and anti-Semites, and the performance ended with mass arrest of the demonstrations, who were actually shouting anti-governmental and anti-Jewish slogans. Anti-Jewish pickets were organized not only inside the theaters, but also in front of them, culminating in police intervention. And for example, during one of such anti-Jewish demonstrations organized in Bielsko in 1933, Jewish spectators were mauled and poured with hydrochloric acid by Polish anti-Semites who gathered in front of the theater to demonstrate their anti-Semitic ideas. Theatrical reviews printed in Polish nationalist press became a pretext to present extreme anti-Semitic views, although what is worth to mention, some journalists refused to call their articles as reviews because, for example, as it was explained in Gazeta Poranna 2 grosze, it was a very anti-Semitic daily, it was said that the author of the review said that Gazeta is not a Jewish newspaper to inform about embodimations performed in Yiddish theaters, although actually his article is a typical review fulfilled with anti-Semitic slogans. The nationalist theater critics publish as well in their reviews the list of so-called crypto-Jews. It was a part of action to combat the Judaization of theaters in Poland, and the crypto-Jew were either Jewish artists performing or directing in Polish theaters, or Polish artists collaborating with Yiddish theater troupes. So here we have some of the examples. Arnold Schiffman The director of the Polish theater, he was of course a Jewish director, was called as the first Jew of the Republic of Poland after directing Hamlet in 1939 in Warsaw. Leon Schiller was addressed as a stinking Shabbos goy while staging Shakespeare Tempest in Yiddish with the Volks- and Jugendtheater's cooperation. And actually, Schiller had a lot of problems to cooperate with Polish artists, Polish theater directors after he cooperated with this Yiddish troupe. Another example, of course, is Marek Arenstein, whose ethnicity was discussed in details in Daily Rozwój in the article entitled Propagators of Jewish Arts. The artist was accused of spreading Jewish propaganda throughout the Second Republic of Poland. Andrzej Marek, a Jewish director, organized a vagabond theater of Polish actor, the journalist of Rozwój warned, with whom he travels from town to town, staging 4 Yiddish plays. In the pages of Gazeta Poranna 2 grosze, it was emphasized that Arenstein, so-called the Jew with 2 faces, was a liar because he tried to hide his real identity under the Christian name and a false last name Marek. Polish nationalist circles also attacked Polish actors performing in Yiddish theaters or artists who decided to cooperate with Jewish artists. For example, a reviewer of Ilustrowany Kurier Codzienny, it was a nationalist daily published in Kraków, looked shocked at Polish artists, as he said, dressed up as hałaciarze. Hałaciarze, a negative name for a Jew. Wojciech Brydziński, who played the role of Tzadik in the Dybbuk, was accused of betraying the Polish nation and was named a crypto-Jew. Karol Anwentowicz, another prominent Polish actor, after participating in the production of Golem, was denied the right to call himself a Polish tragedian. In Głos Narodowy and Kurier Poznański, the question was raised, actually, what prompted Wanda Siemaszkowa, a great Polish actress, to play the title role in Mirele Ethros, and it was said in Kurier Poznański that she played this great Polish actress in a sloppy melodrama staged for a Jewish audience in a primitive theater building. So Siemaszkowa was very much criticized by the Polish nationalist circles for participating in this production. An indirect answer to those questions were given by the journalist of Daily Rozwój, who said that it was probably about financial benefits. So this is how great Polish artists go into Jewish captivity. They do it simply for money. The journalist of the Rozwój sum up the decision of Polish artists who decided to cooperate with Jewish theater circles. The journalist of the nationalist press called either for a boycott of Jewish productions staged in Yiddish or for use of drastic form of protest. So a good example is the premiere of Messiah Zeiten by Shalom Ash in Przemyśl, as a part of the protest against the promotion of the Yiddish immoral play among Polish Catholics. One of the theater goers fired a shot at the actors during the performance. It was a Polish student.
Agatha,
yeah.
you have 1 more minute. I wrote it before, but maybe you didn't.
Okay. Okay. So just the last example. Not all journalists decided to conduct such actions. For example, the reporter of Gazeta Poranna 2 Grosze believed that Jewish dramas staged in Yiddish theaters should be treated as a didactic materials, allowing through polls deepening knowledge about demoralized Jews. So, for example, after the staging Godfunne Komme, the production was described in the weekly Purity, which is in Polish means czystość, a magazine devoted to combining social pathologies, in particular prostitution and pimping. The journalist emphasized the educational nature of this theater production. He recommended seeing it to make young people aware of the problem of the Jewish harlotry in Poland. And moreover, it was said that the characters created by Ash were reliable representative of Jewish degenerates. The pimp, the main character, looked like a typical Jew with a piggy face, with lascivious and cruel expression on it, and animal eyes. So, conclusions. Theater among Polish nationalist circle was not a cultural institution, but a kitsch. It was only visited by simple and uneducated people, and Polish nationalists strongly condemned any sense of false interest in Yiddish theaters. However, there were as well some groups who encouraged Poles to visit Yiddish performances in order to learn everything about the enemy of Poland. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Agatha. Now we have time for questions, remarks, comments. Marcos? You're mute.
You're mute, Marcos.
Okay, thank you, Agatha, for your talk and for presenting this perspective. I am curious about two different phenomena that you are addressing in your talk. The first one is that if it is so contested, the interest on Yiddish and Yiddish theater, that means that there are people very interested in among those called Poles, and it's a very big interest in Yiddish theater. If you can talk about this non-Jewish interest in Yiddish theater, if they are emphasizing that the only poor and simple people are going to the Yiddish theaters, that means that they are reflecting a desire of labeling those Yiddish theater goers as an lower class to implicitly explain to the Polish viewers that it is not their place. That is one question. Then one set of questions. The interest in the so to speak, the Polish street on Yiddish theater. And I have another question, but let's begin with that.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. In my presentation, I'm only focused on Polish anti-Semitic circles. So the representatives of those groups mainly treated Yiddish theater as Schund. So, they wanted to get rid of that from Poland, before Poland gained independence and after, yes? So it was a threat it was a kind of threat for Polish culture. But on the other hand, there were a lot of representatives of Polish intelligentsia who went to see Yiddish productions who wrote about it in newspapers. But the problem was that Poles didn't really know Yiddish language. Even Roman Brandstetter, who was a great friend of Yiddish artists and tried to write reviews, mentioned that he had problems with understanding. Yes, he was reading dramas mainly in German or in Polish when they were translated, and the problem with Yiddish theater for Poles was that the ones who decided to go to visit Yiddish theaters, they wanted to see something Jewish. So there's a great debate between Polish and Yiddish artists when Weiher decided to direct The Merchant of Venice, yes, by William Shakespeare. And it was the first really professional production of Shylock in Yiddish theater in Poland. And he invited many representatives of Polish intelligentsia, and many of them refused to come to see it because they said, we have Shakespeare in Polish theater, we don't need it in Yiddish language, yes? So I don't know if it's enough to answer, because
I will update only that we will start David's talk at 1:10, and we will take the break at 1:30, so there is still more time for a couple of questions.
We had in Poland two kinds of Yiddish theaters, yes, amateur and professional, avant-garde, and quite traditional. So Polish intelligentsia used to visit these professional performances by, I don't know, Wilner Truppa and stuff like that. The works by Lateiner or Goldfaden were treated even in interwar period as a kind of schön for the poor audience. Yes,
Marcos?
No, I am interested, very interested in the question, in this question of this. I would say even ambivalent regard from this Polish anti-Semite side to the Yiddish theater, because it reflects as a mirror, reflects some reality. It reflects that if they are fighting against the interest, that means that it is some interest then not in the among the anti-Semites, but on the let's say the liberal and progressive. I am asking because I am interested in these off-stage connections that are not only on stage, that are not only official. Weichert in his autobiography mentioned about the interest of non-Jews in Yiddish theater. And that is interesting. That's the point. I will refer to the visit of a Polish artist to the Yiddish Kleinkunst. Zula Pogorzelska went with Konrad Thom to see Jigan and Schumacher, and Konrad Thom translated to her. That means that it is off stage, not on, you know, and I would say even add something. Polski Teatr w Warszawie in Warsaw is 200 meters from the place where the Wicht presented its productions. 200 meters. Nobody went from the Polski Theater to see Turkov or Kaminska. For me, it would be very, very, very surprising if nobody went.
we can't say no, but there were a lot of people interested.
That is the point.
But
Who are the
they
people?
were, I would say, a great number of Polish theater critics. But for example, Polish assimilated Jews like Tuwim or Słonimski, they avoided Yiddish theater. They didn't even want to write reviews devoted to those productions in Polish language Jewish newspaper, which is Wiadomości Literackie, yes? The main trend was that Yiddish professional theater is worth to visit because it's a kind of terra incognita for Poles, yes? But there were no many, let's say, representatives of Polish liberal circles who decided to visit those theaters. There are names, always the same names, yes, who are visiting. Brandstetter, Karol Adwentowicz, even the actors who decided to act in Yiddish productions.
We have to continue. Yeah. Sorry to cut, and sorry, Emma. I know that you're waiting for a question, but we are already late. So you can maybe also write your questions in the chat directly to Agatha and continue. So we'll continue with the panel. Thank you very much, Agatha. Now we continue with David Stern, a scholar of theater, performance, film, literature, and folklore, focusing on Eastern European Jewish culture. She currently teaches at the department of the Hebrew Theater Department at the Hebrew University and at the Tisch School of Film and Television at Tel Aviv University. In the years 2011 till 2015, she was a research fellow at the University of Oxford. She holds an MA in Yiddish culture from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. She has published and lectured extensively on Yiddish culture. Her forthcoming book, that we are expecting it, titled The Birth of Theater from the Spirit of Folk Performance, Eastern European Jewish Culture and the Invention of a National Dramatic Heritage, examines the emergence of the myth that views the Purim Spiel and as the origin of Jewish theater. And the title of her talk, just a second, is The Archive, the Repertoire and Jewish Theater, Performing Heritage in Interwar Warsaw. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Diego. Thank you, everybody, for thank you, Ruthie, for inviting me, and thank all the other speakers and audience. Okay, so I'll start. How can one construct a dignified theatrical heritage in a culture with no dramatic canon, ongoing theatrical institutions, or state support? How can one forge such a heritage by theatrical means? In my talk today, I'll present Yiddish performance a Yiddish performance that rose to these challenges. Cercle as stage at the Warsaw Central Theater in the 1923-24 season. The modernist production of Shloime Ettinger's Maskilik drama sought to bring grandness into the low, wild, and carnivalesque popular Yiddish theater, and, more ambitiously perhaps, generate a sense of a historical legacy. Directed by Zygmunt Turkov and performed by a young ensemble that was about to evolve in the following year into the Vic Theater, the Warsaw Yiddish Art Theater, Circular reclaimed 19th century Yiddish closet drama for the sake of an urgent national aspiration to invigorate modern Jewish theater and to enhance the viewer's aesthetic sensibility and historical awareness. While much has been written about how Yiddish art theaters from Warsaw and Łódź and from Moscow to New York sought to raise the aesthetic standards of Yiddish theater, less scholarly attention has been dedicated to the battle for a theatrical heritage, which, as I'll show today, took shape and not only shaped, historiographical writings, but also was materialized on stage. Turkov's Circle, a pioneering archival artwork, sheds light on the unique path taken by Yiddish culture in what regards the weighty task of nation building and cultural rejuvenation, its quest for a usable past, mobilization of the archive, and the heroic struggle to promote and at times fabricate notions of cultural continuity. So, on the eve of Sukkot, Monday, September 24th, 1923, a small ad, which you see in front of you, was published in the Polish Yiddish language daily newspaper Der Moment, calling on audiences to attend the performance of the play Cercle with a renowned actress, Esther Rochel Kaminska. And if you read Yiddish, you can read that this is also described as a Gor Anai Theater Stück, a brand new theater. As festive production, to use the play's wording, celebrating Yiddish theater's jubilee. Anniversary celebrations were much loved within the Yiddish-speaking world. However, Yiddish theater was and still is widely considered to have begun in 1876, the year Goldfaden first appeared in Schumann Mark's Green Tree in Yashi, Romania, the year in which he started organizing his professional theater. Yiddish theater's jubilee was thus to be celebrated only in 1926, but a certain historical urge or a will to heritage was probably what had hastened Yiddish theater's jubilee in 3 whole years. The desire to crown the production of Cercle as a historical event is notable also in preview articles published in both Der Moment and Heinz, the 2 popular Yiddish daily newspapers, which pronounced enthusiastically the premiere to be held the next day. Under the title A Holiday, a Yontev, Aaron Einhorn writes in Hind, "Tomorrow is a holiday for Jewish theater, not only for the theater, but for our young culture at large. The best way to tell that a national culture has some standing, that it blooms and grows, is when it stops living by the day and starts considering itself from a historical perspective," end quote. In Der Moment, Yosef Chaim Heftman describes the production as festive and declares the play a century old. Once again, a rushed anniversary is being celebrated, as the play was probably written between 1825 and 1830 and published only in 1861. In the realm of Yiddish culture, a century-old play would be a true prehistoric dinosaur, preceding not only the birth of Yiddish theater, but also the rise of modern Yiddish literature in the 1860s with the works of Abramovich, Yoel Yitzchok Linetsky, and Isaac Meir Dick. The ads and previews take it for granted that only a few people would be aware of the play so far. Yet the claim goes that by getting to know Cercle, audiences will gain a historical perspective and strengthen their national awareness. The play was also regarded as a historic documentation of Jewish life of the preceding century, the life of our grandmothers and grandfathers, as Heftman writes, their clothes, customs, and language. Little did it matter to him that Cercle was a didactic comedy bordering on caricature, a combination of Molière's Tartuffe and Lessing's bourgeois dramas, a satire portraying religious people as debased hypocrites and the Maskilim as pure and holy. Heftman also mentions a preview production by the students of the Rabbinical Academy in Zhytomyr, 1862, a pioneering adaptation embedded in cultural memory, thanks to the fact that the leading role of Cercle was played by no other than Avram Goldfaden, the so-called father of Yiddish theater, who, according to those who watched the show, performed exceedingly well. It was then with great enthusiasm that Turkov took upon himself history's heavy burden. Turkov was excited about Serkole's historic allure and strived to turn it into an asset and a prominent part of his dramaturgy. True, the story is a simple one, he writes in his memoir, but it is not the story that matters most. The melodramatic plot, the masculine didactic content, and even the unforgettable main character, one of the most colorful and evil women in Jewish drama, a villain who tries to deprive her niece of her inheritance, all are shadowed by the play's historic weight. Put differently, Turkov was less interested in Serkole, the character, or in Serkole, the play, and more in Serkole, the archival finding that he considered a historical national treasure and presented it as such. Ettinger's closet drama became a site of memory, an archaeological or museological gesture. As we shall see soon, Turkov's Serkole flaunts its archival origin while striving to become a milestone in the history of Yiddish theater, a cornerstone of its dramatic canon or its canon to become. Turkov's archival approach to Serkole corresponds to the way he discovered the play. As he himself recalls, one day his friend Yankov Zussman, a Yiddish prose writer and poet, reproached him by saying, "What's all this about Molière, Gogol, Andreev? For God's sake, don't we have Jewish writers?" Following this remonstration, Turkov started looking for old Yiddish plays. A friend suggested to Serkole and got him a copy from Prilutsky's private collection in Shloime Ettinger's own handwriting, stamped by the Polish censor. The play thus made its way to Turkov's hands as a prestigious archival object, an authentic item to be discovered, demonstrating a direct, tangible relation to its writer and bearing a clear historical footprint in the form of the censor's stamp. This stamp tells of the relation between Jews and Polish authorities, as well as of the specific history of this play. Ettinger wished to print out the play, and when he handed it to the Polish censor as demanded, he received it with so many changes that he decided to give up on printing it. He handwrote, therefore, dozens of copies, distributed them among his friends and acquaintances, and even organized reading events. The handwritten play is therefore an ossified historic exhibit, yet also evidence of a performative and subversive praxis. This heavy historical burden shaped the production of Serkole in many ways. First, Turkov considers Serkole an unmediated testimony of past life. He thus made great efforts to turn the production into a period piece, a reenactment of specific Jewish history. Yitzchok Schlossberg, a composer and conductor, had written the musical score based on old motifs from Galicia. A local Badchan researched historic materials of Galician Badchanim to form the humoristic scene in which the Badchan sings to the bride. The painter, graphic artist, and set designer Moshe or Maurizi Appelbaum, who was greatly invested in Jewish folklore, designed the set and costumes according to the fashion of 19th century. And Appelbaum was helped by the renowned Polish Jewish historian Meir Bawaban, and by the Museum of the Jewish Community in Warsaw, who provided him with sketches and assisted him in designing the set and costumes. A major challenge was posed by the language of the play that was not only archaic and local, the Galician dialect, but was also polyphonic. Traditional Jews, Maskilim, less educated Maskilim, assimilated Jews, all spoke their own parlance in Serkole. On this matter, Turkov advised the historian Yitzchok Schipper, an expert of Jewish-Polish history and a key figure in the ambitious project of writing the history of Yiddish theater and researching or inventing its origins in the faraway past. Schipper worked with the actors on language and elocution, and in Turkov's words, turned the stage into a scientific laboratory in dialect studies, end quote, to accurately present the various characters in the play. Turkov realized that the play would be too literary for the Jewish audiences. However, while economic pressures impelled him to appeal to the audience's taste, he nevertheless took part in the endless campaign against commercial Schund culture and hoped Circula would be accessible, amusing, and at the same time educational. Not all shared his optimism and enthusiasm. When he first introduced his discovery to the Central Theater's troupe and the venue's owner, he recounts, they compelled Circula to Meise Bichelach, storybooks written for old Jews, or to foolish Bemeises, old wives' tales. Only during rehearsal did they change their minds. The stage text itself presented the performance as an act of discovering a hidden treasure or even a resurrection, in Turkov's term. A series of introductions framed the event as theater within theater. First came on stage, that is the apron stage in front of the still closed curtain, a comic actor playing Ettinger, the playwright. Although Ettinger was a highly educated man, fluent in Yiddish, German, Hebrew, Polish, a physician, he was portrayed lightly and humorously. Another way of framing the show revealed itself when the curtain opened and the show to show the actors blowing the dust off a huge book. That's what you see here. It's not a very clear photo provided by Turkov himself, as if they were uncovering a treasure. When the book was opened, and here you can see it's the writing, it says Circele, oder it's supposed to be oder die Jod noch a Brider, noch einmal Gor, and again Nora Guy Night Theaterstück in 3 or 3 acts, as opposed to the original 5, by the way. When the book was opened, the viewer saw an enlarged reproduction of the play's front page in Ettinger's handwriting. The meta-theatrical act introduced the play's literary source, so the printed drama, into the show, and thus shed light on the backstage, the work of the historian, the archivist, and the director himself, who probed through the cultural assets of the past.
David, one minute more.
Okay. Two more gestures was an introduction by Schieper, who presented the playwright and even addressed the Ettinger's 80-year-old daughter. He said, "We bless the blood of the classic writer," and thus expressed the urgency and the notion of cultural and national continuity. And second, and also of course, by using Esther Rochel Kaminska, this endowed the whole production again with a certain sense of legacy. So just to summarize, and just one more thing from the. This is the Der Tunkeler, the humorist from the Hind and Moment, and he writes about Circele, and he described this girl ties into Agata's talk. He describes the clash between, on the one hand, this festive historical production, and on the other hand, the people who try to sneak in without tickets, and how the director tries to explain how festive and important this is while cursing them, Shakrev, and etc. So yes, I'll just mention that in the same year, there was another production put up together by Turkov, which was Der Priziv, once again taking something from the archive. And this ties again into what Agata said about the hostility and of Polish environment, of some of the Polish environment, and how Jewish artists really felt sometimes inferior to their European colleagues. So this way of producing an archival artwork and producing a historical heritage was a way of promoting, creating a sense of a national heritage, of national pride. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Now, because of the time, we will collect all the questions together. Questions, if you have, it takes time. Ruti, let's wait if there are other questions, so we will give David the time to answer all together.
Maybe
Okay, let's start.
maybe after I'll ask, there'll
Sure.
be some more questions.
Ask.
So David, thank you. This was really, really interesting. I wonder, this is a fascinating case study of an archival or an old piece that is restaged, and I wonder if you could perhaps say something about the sort of sentiment that you think it tapped upon when it was staged. Did it have a sense of nostalgia? Was it supposed to arouse a Jewish nationalist kind of atmosphere, or perhaps some kind of longing to a past that never existed? What was this aiming towards?
Mm-hmm. So I think there was a sense of maybe part of it was maybe nostalgia or recreating this Galician. Also, we're sitting in Warsaw and we're creating a Galician, so we're going a little bit far, and 19th century. So there was a sense of recreating the past. What I was trying to show is that this was not the only thing. This is very common when you in theater to reenact a period, not just a period piece, but the sense of look what we found in the archive, and presenting circular as an artifact. To me, this was the unique thing, as that we do have a heritage. You maybe you haven't noticed, and maybe you only notice the shun that everybody will tie there and whatever you see, but we actually, if you look well enough, you go back 100 years ago onto the Haskalah times or to Mendel and Moichel's Falling, then you can find actual findings that are amazing, worthwhile, and maybe would be put us at the right place, like next to Molière, Gogol, and Dreyev. So that's what they were looking for. And then the other way to do it is through the Purim spiel, which is interesting and a different way, but I couldn't go into this today.
Other questions? Okay, so I only would add that also I think, I think that it can be read also in the way of these last 20 years of works dealing with reenactment, also in dance, that are in a way trying to create a type of repertoire and an archive of the impossibility of to create an archive of dance. So in a way, this activist approach to have this own tradition through performance is a way of constituting the history itself. I don't know if I'm clear in this formulation, but anyway, I will continue later. So Ruti, I don't know when are we supposed to meet again?
Yes, I think we will. Thank you, David, and thank you, Agata, for a wonderful panel. I think we will leave now for a lunch break, and we will reconvene as planned at 2:15. So that we can have 40 minutes lunch break. I think that's okay. And thank you, everyone, and see you soon.
Sorry, so 2:15, Ruti?
2:15, yes.
2:15. Thank you very much, Ruti, Agata, and David, for the great panel, and
Thank you.
hope to meet you at 2:15. again. Bye.
Of my ongoing cabaret research, I had the privilege to speak with the songwriter and the cultural producer, Chaim Feiner-Hefer, who during 1947 had written sketches for the cabaret. With a great excitement, he said, "What? Don't you get it? Here Polish women are coming to town, and here is a new style in theater. It was unheard of and extreme. Suddenly, a lady on stage sings. There is something about her after all." And then he paused for a minute or two and added, "People loved Shoshana Damari. She was Israeli. She spoke Hebrew with Ayin and Het." Indeed, the songs written by Natan Alterman for Shoshana Damari and composed by Moshe Vilensky, as well as songs by Shlonsky and Ashman, played a major role in what I have termed the national afterlife of Lila Lo. But here I wish to highlight the phrase, "Polish women are coming to town," and explore the network and the transnational mechanism that facilitated the import of leisure culture to Tel Aviv. In the Yeshuv cultural landscape, theater had a major role as one of the main arenas in which communities could gather, express, and share their experiences. Barbara Rosenwein had termed emotional communities into the historical lexicon, defining it as groups in which people share the same norms of emotion, expression, and value, or devalue, the same related emotions. Hence, emotional communities are governed by certain emotional regimes, which William Reddy defines as a set of normative emotions and the official rituals, practices, and emotives that express and infuse them, a necessary underpinning of any stable political regime. In contrast, Reddy defined emotional refuge, a relationship, ritual, or organizations, whether informal or formal, that provide safe relays for prevailing emotional norms, which allows relaxation of emotional effort with or without ideological justifications, which may show up a threat of existing emotional regime. Drawing on Rosenwein and Reddy, I suggest that Lila Lo provided a double emotional refuge, first in the sense that Gamzug spoke of, as well as in relation to the emotional regime promoted by the cultural elite. At the same time, constructing the values associated with normative national emotions, thus addressing multiple emotional levels which characterizes the diversified community needs. The artist who performed in the cabaret formed a professional emotional community revolving mainly around excitement, pleasure, love, passion, laughter, emotions expressing optimism and vitality. They conjure a mix of humor and moments of nostalgia and excitement, delivering spectacular stardust performances. The emotions transmitted by the songs and the scenes allowed the audience to enjoy, laugh, and be moved by daily life events, to express longing and love, to re-encounter the familiar delivered in a new spoken language, thus sheltering from the pain, the difficulties of adapting to a new land, and the uncertainty. At the same time, through Shoshana Damari's repertory, the audience was invited to experience romantic, sentimental emotions that strengthened national identity through a European Orientalist musical language composed by Vilensky, who graduated from the Royal Conservatory in Warsaw. At this point, we can shift to the theatrical network on which the cabaret was founded. I will begin with Lola Helen Kiatevich, whose picture is seen on the seminar flyer. Her story exemplify the fruitful network between Lila Law in Tel Aviv and Qui Pro Quo in Warsaw, where conferencier Frederick Hiroshi and the singer Hanka Ordanovna both started. Researchers show that cabarets in the cultural centers during the interwar period were built on a network between performers, producers, and touring troops. It happens that Hiroshi, who arrived in Warsaw during a tour of the Bluebird, a Russian-German cabaret, falls in love with Ordanovna, decided to stay in the city, and overnight became a popular conferencier. This despite, or rather because, he spoke broken Polish. When in 1938, Ordanovna went to a tour to the United States, Lola Kitayevich began performing in the Barbar of Warsaw Cabaret, an offshoot of the Qui Pro Quo opened its closure. In March 1939, Kayatevich performed alongside Hiroshi in the review Warsaw for Sale. After that, she was on the run and somehow ended up in Palestine, Eretz Israel in 1941. However, in the beginning of the 50s, she immigrated to England, London. I would like to point out that none of the Polish women who performed in a Lila Law cabaret stayed in Israel after 1948, but for now, we will suspend the attempt to answer why. Besides Shoshana Damari, who was at the beginning of her career, all the artists that Valin employed, just a minute, had extensive stage experience and brought embodied knowledge and practices of cabaret performances. Their presence made a strong impression on the audience that emotionally moved due to several reasons. First, each brought representation of the new woman sexuality not previously seen on Tel Aviv stages. For instance, one theater critic said that Mina Bern should translate her foreign name, Bern, to Hebrew, meaning a burning flame. Jenny Lubitsch was described as one of those daughters of Eve who will lead you blindly where she will, a divine actress whose fatal charm situated all spectators. Second, I will show you something. Second, they were comedians.
Dorit, the slideshow is not, we don't see the slides going. I think you need to stop share and reshare.
Oh, why? But it takes my time. I will.
No, I'll see it. See what I'm sharing.
We will give you this.
Don't worry.
This extra minute.
כן, עכשיו רואים.
Yeah.
עכשיו רואים?
כן, עכשיו רואים.
Okay, Irina Rozhinska was described as knowing how to bring one to tears of laughter. Third, they dressed up, put on makeup and walk on high heels. Their presence, along with their male partners, bestow upon the cabaret its cosmopolitan character and celebrity appearance that enable the audience to imagine they were part of trans cultural community. None of them spoke Hebrew. They learned the songs by transcribing them into Polish letters. The network of dramatic connection between the cabaret and the Qui Pro Quo enriched the repertoire of jokes and sketches, which were constantly translated from Polish by Shmuel Fisher, among others. The traffic between Warsaw and Tel Aviv peaked when Valin agreed to Kayatevich's suggestion to invite Hiroshi to direct the cabaret. Hiroshi came from London after surviving the war in Warsaw. He directed and even took part in the Saloon in 1947. In the review's program, Shmuel Fisher published an enthusiastic open letter to Hiroshi, confessing that for years he had been stealing sketches and jokes, and now, under historical circumstances, they all had the privilege to steal him and his jokes back to their cabaret. In February 1948, Yaroshi directed for adults only. When the winds of war grew stronger, the cabaret shut down, and Yaroshi boarded a ship at Tel Aviv port back to his exile existence in London. The cabaret network succeeded in providing the audience an emotional refuge during the last horrible months of the Second World War and up to the verge of the Independent War. This brings us to the emotional regime that governed the cabaret. The institutional culture that took shape among the cultural elite of the Yishuv during British Mandate grew stronger when the War of Independence broke out, developing an emotional repertoire adapting to a reality of danger and security threat. It was an effort to establish a restrained society in face of danger, loss, bereavement, and sacrifice. The cabaret has always been much more than a medium, a genre, an arena, or a style. It is a form of expression, a response, and a source of hope. No written sketches have remained, but the picture speaks of the enjoyment of both performer and audiences, conveying emotional refuge. We'll see some pictures here. Okay, and then we'll come here. These are pictures from the Barber of Tel Aviv, directed by Zenon Verden, who brought the tango to Lila Lo. In the middle, we see Golden, the barber, an immigrant, ole, refuge, plowing through the undergrowth of bureaucracy. The performer's pleasure radiates the enjoyment of the audience. These are pictures from, just see the pictures from the Barber of Tel Aviv, never seen before such a representation of women. And these are pictures from other programs which demonstrate how costumes and props create images of playfulness, amplifying the amusing moments in sketches, as in Woman with a Hat, its Alterman sketch, and The Merry Widow. The success of the cabaret among audiences is especially notable in light of the theater critics, who from the fourth program onward had much to say, although there was much admiration for the performer's skills and spectacular presence as well. The critics argued that the translated humor was improper to the Eretz Israeli audience. It is a bad imitation. The performances are intended for a petite bourgeois audiences looking for cheap entertainment and lack of local humor. They added that the show and performers were not Israeli enough and that the latter must work on their Hebrew and adapt. This criticism expresses the forced norms of emotional regime, which was on the rise those days. Using Rosenwein and Reddy concepts on the historiography and the function of the Kleine Kunst during the British Mandate period open up the possibility of a diversified emotional community, which revolve both around transnational performance styles and emotion. With the success of the Palmach ensemble during 1948 and later the military ensembles, no room was left for diversified entertainment. The khaki color and musical style by the army entertainment troops took over the local popular culture. Apparently, this is one of the reasons that caused the stars of the cabaret to leave Tel Aviv and seek varied audiences elsewhere in Jewish communities around the world. Here is Yaroshi and Shoshana Damari in Tel Aviv, and here you can see Shoshana Damari singing in Cyprus. The song that Yaroshi has staged her in the last program he directed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorit, for this paper. connecting Poland with Tel Aviv, or Warsaw with Tel Aviv, and connecting emotionally this community of performers. We will open the discussion for questions and give also the opportunity to Dorit to answer. So if there are questions.
Maybe you want to stop share?
So I have in any case, I have a question or remark. Maybe this in some way is the community of this community of performers of you presented. You mentioned that are, I would say, kind of grouping confronting a deep existential crisis. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what is interesting, and it is a big break between their past in Warsaw and their present in Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if how this, the Barber of Tel Aviv, the title of this first
review,
the first review is connected to the title of one of the last. The last reviews in Warsaw was Cyrulik Warszawski, the Barber of Warsaw. Yes. And this how you see this the effort to continue, to present some continuation.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a wonderful comment on the subject. I must say that I don't know Polish. I even don't know Yiddish, as you know. And
nobody is perfect.
No, nobody is perfect. And I read everything through my Israeli eyes. And what I know is that for them, it wasn't only pleasure. It was a way to survive financially. And the little law, they earn much more money than in any theater. And it was 4 years that they, all of them just came, and they start to sing in a small cafe in Tel Aviv, Uberman Cafe, and Valin saw them there and invite them to his cabaret, and they did his cabaret, but they earn money, they rent houses. Jenny Lubitsch has a son, so she had money to put him in a school in Ben Shemen. So they go through a catastrophe. They all left their family somewhere in Europe, but these 4 years for them was something that like a renewal, or to do something for surviving. And it's not, and it's really not surprising that they left. It was something so extreme in the Israeli landscape.
Yes, that's what you are mentioning is how this way of this, let's say, way to perform cosmopolitanism was also negatively labeled.
Yes.
And yes, Shelley. And
Ruti also wanted. Ruti?
Yes, thank you, Dorit. This is such a great story, and I have so many questions. I think my first question goes to the idea of an emotional community. In what way do you think the audience was homogenic enough to become a community? Or in what way do you define the audience as a community? And another question that relates to this has to do with these wonderful pictures they show, and this maybe connects a bit to Agata's lecture this morning. They show very provocative feminine sexuality, which is very rare from the period and place and the time. This is very odd. And so when you address the emotional community, how would you presume this community perceived these sexual images?
In in relation to emotional community, I think from what Tel Aviv was, the people that lives in Tel Aviv those days, most of them came from Warsaw, Lodz, whatever in Poland. They speak Yiddish or Poland or whatever, and they knew each other. They even have a newspaper in Polish, and they knew the performers and the new violin, and they knew each other. So they gather as a community. And what I'm trying to do is to speak about diversified emotional community. That's something that I have in my mind while adopting my research to the concepts of history of emotions. And for them, in relation to the way they stage and this, I think that's why, that is why Chaim Hefer take a break in what he said to me and said, but everyone loves Shoshana Damari. What I understand from this, the women that came was, they are not, everyone was amazed. It was they were the Marlene Dietrich of Tel Aviv. And the critics spoke about them like this. So, but it didn't continue afterwards. It was for a short time. And I must say that after the Barber of Tel Aviv, I look all over the picture, there was no such naked bodies. I think something changed there.
Thank you. Dorit, Shelley, please.
Yes, thank you. It's wonderful lecture. What fascinates me is the fact that you are describing a migration net and with various agents, some willingly and some unwillingly, and the net for emotions on the move, the way emotions immigrate. And in this respect, I'm wondering, like you spoke of Shoshana Damari, but what were or could you track the changes between, like just shifting emotions that are moved from Warsaw to London and then to Tel Aviv, even before Shoshana Damari? Could you point at a process of adapting or transforming while preserving certain things that come, all this route? What do you think about the route?
No, if I understand, first of all, thank you, Shelley. It's amazing to think about emotion immigrates, immigration of emotions. You remember in the oil, they stage Yosha Egel when he invite
Maurice Schwartz
to Tel Aviv from New York, and the critics said, what is the emotion when everyone enjoy? Why everyone why other critics are angry that performances make enjoyment? And we can think about the Hebrew theater as something that they didn't see themselves as a theater that have to make enjoyment, only pathos, only miserable situations, things like that. And if you think about Habima repertory, it's exactly like that. And maybe and the oil from time to time, and Lila Law, of course, and even the Matete that you're dealing with, they make what you called well-being, but if we turn it to a specific emotions, it's a comic emotion, it's humor, it's something that we can laugh on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions of comment or comments? Agata, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Thank
Please.
you for your lecture. You mentioned that some of the actresses didn't really speak Hebrew.
None of them speak Hebrew.
Yes, so how the reviewers describe the quality of acting, especially it is very difficult to make the audience laugh, yes, if you don't know the language, if you don't feel it, yes. This is how nowadays, for example, the reviewers are commenting the actors working in Jewish theater in Warsaw. Some of them do not know Yiddish. That's why they have no good reviews because of that language problem.
You know, Agata, thank you for your question. First of all, none of the audiences knew fluently Hebrew. Hebrew was new for everyone. The critics knew Hebrew, that's for sure. I don't have, because of the 15 minutes, I don't have time, but we have records of songs, and it's in a high level of Hebrew. And Jenny Lubitsch, she didn't know Hebrew, and she pronunciate every word exactly as you have to pronounce it, but you can hear the polish in it.
Okay, thank you.
If I remember, Dorit, maybe you can correct me if I am mistaken, but if I remember one of the reviews I read in the newspaper that mentioned that Kitayevich in some place, somebody in the public said something and she said, I do not understand Hebrew, and the public
Okay.
with ovations to this remark.
Yes, it's like that, yes.
That means that it is part of this play between this public that they are coming from, many of them from Warsaw and Łódź, and they knew the genre from Warsaw and Łódź, and they met in Tel Aviv in a new language. This point, but yeah, let's go on. Shelley, we were from the very post-war period to the very pre-war period.
Yes.
We're going from Lila Law to Mirele Efros in July 1939 in Palestine, and the production of a transnational net of anxiety.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Just let me open to share the screen. Just a minute. Here it is. Do you all see the presentation? Okay. So, Habima premiered Yaakov Gordin's iconic play Mirele Efros in July 1939. The play garnered high artistic acclaims and gained overwhelming success. Yehudit Simchoni of Kibbutz Tel Yosef watched the play in fall that year, shortly after the war began, and published a moving column in Dvar HaPoelet. This time, I quote, the play Mirele Efros. A time of worldwide anxiety, the tabernacles of Jacob are destroyed. There are doubts whether we have the right to celebrate. Is it not much ado about nothing in days of mourning? But as the curtain rises, you forget the outside world and submit to the suspense. In those moments, you feel, here is a human being, motherhood, love, and hate. The play symbolized for her an act of return to the naivete of the familiar domestic play and to childhood landscapes. The popularity of this production may indicate that Habima's Mirele Efros encapsulated the Yeshuv's collective view of the Eastern European Jewish experience on the eve of World War II. However, the distinction between Jewish Eastern Europe and the Yeshuv was not a clear cut, as most of the inhabitants of the Yishuv had arrived from Eastern Europe only recently, leaving relatives and friends behind. In this lecture, I would like to suggest that Mir LeEfros turned into a cultural site of boundary walk that enabled the Eastern European Zionist diaspora in Palestine to maintain their traditional cultural affinity with the Jews of Eastern Europe and to channel via the act of spectatorship their feelings of fear and anxiety for their family and friends back home that were facing the upcoming war. Yaakov Godin, who lived between 1853 till 1909, was a Russian Jewish socialist who settled in New York in 1882 and turned there into the star of Yiddish playwriting. For decades, Habima avoided putting on his play, as this elite Hebrew theater company was born out of the rebellion against popular Yiddish theater that was identified with Godin. Only in July 1939, on the eve of the war, Habima put on for the first time a Hebrew version of Mir LeEfros after the company returned from a lengthy tour in Europe, whose highlight was the performances for the Jewish audience in Poland and Lithuania. Habima embarked on a 9-month journey to Europe in September 1937 and performed in France, Belgium, London, Lithuania, Latvia, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Poland. The tour in Europe, overtaken by fascism, was a disturbing experience for the actors. Non-Jews avoided from attending the shows, and even Jews were hesitant of people identifying them as Jewish and were afraid to come. In this context, meeting with the large Jewish population in Poland and the Baltics was a true relief. The Jews of Poland were the largest Jewish community in Europe, 3.5 million people, most of them centered in large cities. Since the mid-1930s, with the growing influence of Nazi Germany, the status of the Jews rapidly deteriorated. They suffered from economical boycotts, restrictions of attending higher education, and frequent acts of violence. On the eve of the war, Zionist leaders from the entire political spectrum feared that a disaster awaited this large Jewish population and exerted feverish diplomatic efforts to facilitate their mass migration to mandatory Palestine. The Habima actors published open letters in real time. In open letters, they described their impression from the encounter with this Jewish audience in Lithuania and Poland. They do not differentiate between the two, and they published it in the theater journal Bama. For many of the Habima actors, returning to Eastern Europe was an act of return to their old homes, as can be seen in the words of Menachem Gnessin, and I quote, when he meets them, he describes them, "We are brothers, brothers in distress and brothers in joy. And every morning we meet on the street, at the cafes, and our eyes are longing, feverishly asking, what's new?" The words of Gnessin indicate the symbiosis of the Jews of Lithuania and Poland and their brethren from Palestine. They share the same worries, joys, and concerns. This sense of symbiosis explain Yaakov Shavit and Yuda Reinatz, a characteristic of the relationship between the Yishuv and Polish Jewry of the 1930s. The Jews of Poland felt deep concern about the future of the Yishuv, whereas the Jews of Palestine were concerned about the growing anti-Semitism and the threats from Nazi Germany. The boundary work of Habima expressed, therefore, the blurring of identities between the old and the new cultural homes and the depth of this transnational contact between the two communities. Upon returning to Tel Aviv, Habima decided to put on Mir LeEfros, a play deeply associated with the Eastern European Jewish world. The only one problem, it wasn't written in Eastern Europe. The play displays the domestic landscapes of Grodno and Slutsk, But Gordin wrote the play in 1898 in the United States as a Yiddish adaptation of Shakespeare's King Lear. The play was such a tremendous success that it made its way back to the Yiddish theaters of Eastern Europe and turned into a hit there as well. It encouraged the theater goers, mostly first-generation immigrants, to process their guilt feelings for betraying their parents' norms and traditions. The play impacted the theater goers of Palestine in a similar manner. It enabled them to conduct a symbolic return to the domestic landscapes they had left behind. Shlomo Boltzmann argued that, and I quote, "It was as if they, the actors, were living their natural lives on the stage," end of quote. The encounter between the Abima actors and Gordin's dramatic text enabled the ensemble to create a performance of authenticity, namely a performance in which the biography of the actors turned into the focus of the artistic event. The usage of language added another level to the performance. The majority of the Eastern European Jews were trilingual. Yiddish serves as the everyday language, Hebrew in religious and intellectual contexts, and in addition, there was the language of the states. The usage of Yiddish in the American and European productions of the play turned the theater into an intimate sphere of domesticity. The Abima play, however, was performed in Hebrew. Whereas usually the act of translation aims to bring a foreign culture closer to the receiving culture, in this case it was quite the opposite. Upon arrival in Palestine, the Eastern European Jewish immigrants were expected to abandon Yiddish in favor of the Hebrew. Yiddish continued to be widely used in private spheres. The translation of this domestic play into Hebrew distanced the intimacy of the Yiddish shared by the performers and spectators alike, and appropriated the theatrical event into the Eretz Israeli Zionist norms. The stage speak, however, created an opposite effect. An audio recording of a renewal of the 1939 production, dated from 1958, almost 20 years afterwards, revealed that the stage speech of the actors created a hybrid language, a mixture of Yiddish and Hebrew. Indeed, the language spoken on the stage was Hebrew, but the intonation and pronunciation of the actors echoed the Yiddish original. The best example for that is, of course, the pronunciation of the names. Mirale, Ephros, the name is Ephrat, the biblical name of Ephrat, but it was pronounced as Ephros. Another example is the character of Nachumche, that is a yeshiva student, and he created a kind of blend of Hebrew, Yiddish, yeshiva language, and it's not even clear, or most of the time, which language does he speak. This role was played by Chaim Amitai after Gnessin. We may assume that Gnessin created same kind of character with this Yiddishist musicality of language, even though he spoke Hebrew. Boltzmann summarized his impression of the play, and I quote again, "The audience sensed something close to their heart, and each remembered Mirale in his shtetl and his street, the one he had seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears." Via its thematic and performance language, this production enabled a collective return to the intimate landscapes and evoked memories and sense of belonging, while gently maintaining the good enough characteristics of the Hebrew culture that would make it suitable for the new Eretz Israeli landscape. The theater critic Latsky Bartoldi pointed at the Gostin captured in the role of Mirale, and I quote, "It was created by the best of our actresses, Kenny Liptzin in America, Esther Rochel Kaminsky in Europe, and Chana Rovina in Eretz Israel," and the quote. Latsky Bartoldi was the only critic to refer to Kenny Liptzin, to whom Gordin wrote originally this role. But all other theater critics, with no exception, compared Rovina with Esther Rochel Kaminska. Kaminska, who lived between 1870 till 1925, was the great star of the first generation Warsaw Yiddish theater. Her artistic breakthrough took place during the 1905 revolution. Where Kaminska took the role of Miraleh, she already enjoyed the status of a national figure. Kalinov characterized her stage presence, and I quote, "She was genuinely the ideal Jewish mother, and she broke all the hearts in the theater." But years ago, a Jewish theater critic once said of Esther Rochel Kaminska, "She even danced the tarantula in Nora like a kosher dance." Kalinov refers to Alexander Mukdoini, who belonged to the Warsaw intellectual circle of Yitzhak Leibush Peretz. Mukdoini saw in Miraleh Afros the apex of Kaminska's artistic achievement because she was, in his mind, a Zogerin actress. The Zogerin was a traditional female community leader characterized by her ability, as the name indicates, to zogen, to talk. She used to show the fellow women where the cantor was in the prayer. She used to speak on their behalf on various community affairs. And this was the image of Miraleh. Kaminska, contended Mukdoini, excelled in this role because the character of Miraleh was that of a Zogerin. She preaches, she reads psalms, she pleads. Kaminska explained, mastered the art of speaking. Kaminska's Miraleh was therefore a powerful Eastern European Jewish mother and community leader of the old generation. The Zogerin gained public visibility and cultural recognition via the domain of the theater and becoming a modern Jewish expression in the theater. So we see the shift between the generations. Kaminska and Rovina shared similar lines in their public personas. As these two actresses approached the role of Miraleh, they already both enjoyed the status of national figures. In addition, there were similarities in their acting styles. They were both exhibited grand acting that drew attention to their own virtuosity, and in addition, their artistic signature, both of Rovina and Kaminska, was constituted of the vocal skills, as Ruti already shown. Yet Kalinov pointed that there was something erotic in Rovina's presence that lacked from the stage persona of Kaminska. Rovina's stage character, Miraleh, evoked memory of traditional female community leaders. Her Miraleh ghosted the great diasporic national icon of Esther Rochel Kaminska and heritage of theater life in Poland. The eroticism that she added to this role and her charisma planted it, and artistic biography planted it also in the Zionist context of Palestine, while appropriating it to the local policy of desires. To sum up, the performance of Miraleh Efros enabled the audience of the Yishuv to watch a performance based on a play that was identified with a kind of Jewish exilic culture that ought to be left behind. However, on the eve of World War II, the theater goers of the Yishuv embraced this play. The theatrical event functioned as a site of boundary work that enabled the audience to conduct a bi-directorial transnational cultural move to absorb and legitimate Eastern European Jewish culture on the one hand, and to enable to appropriate it to the Zionist ethos, namely its nationalization or adapting it into the new context on the other. But first and foremost, the performance of Mira Efros enabled the audience on the eve of the war to commune in the theater hall and to collectively face their very private and very intimate longings, fears, and anxieties for their loved ones that were left back in Europe, and to cope together as a community with their feelings of anxiety and despair. The play bestowed upon its audience the comforting and strengthening experience of that contained to assist them in so many ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelley. We will open to the floor for discussion. This very important addition to this transference from Eastern Europe to Tel Aviv. In these specific conditions of the summer of 1939, I think that it is important to emphasize again. We will open to questions. David, please. We do not hear you. Open the microphone.
Sorry. It's more comments and questions, but maybe you will have something to say. But thank you for this wonderful talk, and also Dorit's talk, which together I think tie so well into how through theater could one in the 30s or in the 40s react against the hegemony of the Zionist hegemony of the negation of the diaspora, shlilat galut. So something about the theater and the presence of gesture, of sound, of Ashkenazi pronunciation, of the naked bodies that bring cosmopolitanism, or Mir Le'efros, or 19th century Eastern Europe. It's very nice to look at these two options together. I wanted to refer to the Zogerin idea that you brought up, Shelley, related to that Mokdoni relates to Esther Rachel Kaminska as someone who always looks at how the myth of heritage and roots of Yiddish theater or Jewish theater is constructed. I would take this with a grain of salt, because I've read some of Mokdoni, and he was always like, he was furious with other critics like Schipper, like, why do you look at places like Purim Spiel or like Lo? You should look at Jewish beautiful rituals and the culture of the synagogue. So I would see this attempt to make Esther Rachel Kaminska as Zogerin, exactly the kind of process I was trying to show, that, oh, we're looking to find a heritage, we do have a history, we go centuries back. It's not something that started in the late 19th century. So that's about the Zogerin idea. And just some about Esther Rachel Kaminska, she was really so much associated with Mira Le'efros. That's when I read the critics about Cerkele, one thing people said is like, she was the mother, she couldn't be the shrew, it's and that's why the show, the Cerkele, wasn't such a success, even though she participated in it.
Of Oettinger?
Yeah.
Okay.
She wasn't a good Cerkele because she wasn't enough of a shrew, and so I don't know about the Zogerin, but the Mira Le'efros definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Mokdoni couldn't stand her. He really didn't like her, and it's very obvious that, for him, okay, this is the best she can do. She can be a good Mira Le'efros, but nothing more than that. But the thing that interests me is that the fact that, with the exception of Latsky Bertoldi, none of them has the imagination of the Jewish diaspora of America. This was something interesting. They all moved to Esther Rachel Kaminska, and she was so present there even though I doubt whether all of them saw her. I'm not sure, you know, like those who came from places, you know, in the Ukraine, I'm not sure that they were exposed personally to her. I don't think that she used to tour there a lot. She performed in St. Petersburg, but not necessarily in the southern regions. And yeah, but she was very present, even though.
I would ask comment to the comment of Zeavi that it seems that it is part of this process of nation building, yes, and taking or constructing the traditions in this way or another. And regarding Latsky Bartholdi, I think that it is connected with his ideological background. He was a folkist in the past. Emma, please.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the whole workshop. It's a great pleasure to hear and to participate. I wanted to ask a question. I wanted to ask Shelley a question, but maybe also Dorit can refer, if it's okay with the chair, regarding the linguistic skills and the accent, etc. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not a scholar of theater, in Israel, it was not allowed to present in Yiddish, right? In the theater. So maybe, you know, this was the refuge. This was the way that they could kind of, you know, play the known practices, but in a different language.
But we are in the pre-war, in the pre-state of Israel period, in both
Yes.
languages.
It was allowed.
It was part of the mandate. It was not any legal restriction.
No restrictions on Yiddish Yiddish theater.
Not legal restriction.
Okay, so it makes it even more interesting why they chose to present it in Hebrew. I can understand, you know, the national kind of, or the Zionist kind of ethos, but is there some, if they're kind of longing, they have some kind of, you know, longing to the motherland. So what makes it, you know, so important to speak in Hebrew with this Eastern European accent? So
I think that there's is an answer and a more complex answer. The easiest answer is, of course, they spoke Hebrew. They were Zionists. Habima was a very devoted flagship Zionist theater, and it didn't even think of speaking Yiddish. Of course, they spoke Hebrew. They were totally and utterly devoted to the Zionist project. The more complex question is, what kind of nationalism do they portray within this very Zionist framework? And I think here the answer begins to be more complex, because I think that when you look at the theater of certainly the 1930s, 1940s, it kinds of changes when you approach the 48 war, but not, yes, it changes, but the roots are there, and it's slightly more complex than the way it is perceived. You see a kind of diasporic nationalism. And in this respect, Mirle Efras, which was not an only example, is a very good example to the power of the soft nationalism that relies upon lines of continuity and transnationalism and ethnic sense of belonging. And because they are Zionist, it takes place in Hebrew. But you won't really find in the theater sphere ideas like the negation of diaspora and so on. It's not there. It's definitely not there, and that something else is there. And I think this is it, this soft this, I would call it a soft diasporic nationalism.
Thank you, Shelley. Rudy, I ask for more 5 minutes taking.
Yes, definitely. I see that the Dorit also wants to comment.
Yes,
sure.
yes. Please, Dorit. Do we open the microphone, please?
Sorry. Thank you very much, Emma. I think it's a very good question, not only in the level of ideology, but on the actual practices. And we have a lot of documentation about the lessons and hard work that actors did for adapting the new pronunciation of the Hebrew in one side. On the other side, when you listen to the records of plays or songs, and Ruti wrote a wonderful paper about the sound of Rovina. It's a way of remembering a place. You can hear the languages that they spoke before, or that they spoke at home, that they spoke in private. So you can see, I think it's very interesting because in the theater, it was not like, that it was not allowed to speak Yiddish outside, that everyone has to speak Hebrew, and it was really emotional regime, the language. Just like that, you had outside, you had to speak Hebrew, and it was hard for the people. And in the theater, the private became public, and it was framed with artistic framing, and it gets legitimized. It gave legitimation to the pronunciation. And what's interesting is that in the Hebrew culture, the Yiddish pronunciation, the Polish pronunciation, even this pronunciation was, acceptable. Later, and you can see it till today, there is no legitimation to English pronunciation on the stage. So what your question brings is that it's something like a way to look about the delegitimation and legitimation of different pronunciation.
Thank you. More questions or comments? Maybe one small thought that all the time I'm thinking about, and continuing the line of these emotional communities that is we share here with some people. What is interesting, on the eve of the Second World War, it is staged in Tel Aviv, a piece about ungrateful son, and a grand ungrateful son. When everybody knows that it will be a war, and most of the parents are there.
Yes.
And from this post, Agata, do you have a question or remark?
Yes, I just want to add something. Thank you. It was very interesting to hear about this emotional meaning, symbolic meaning of Mirele Ephros, especially for Jewish diasporas. Now I see the same kind of context when I'm thinking about Mirele Ephros staged in Warsaw Ghetto. It was staged in Polish, and they used as well Chopin music for this production. So it was somehow also to commemorate the past of Polish Jews who were speaking Polish language, yes? Just after the war, Mirele Efros was one of the first dramas staged in Yiddish theater in Łódź, and it was advertised that the drama was supposed to commemorate the Jews who died during the Second World War. It was done in Yiddish, so I see different contexts. So thank you very much for your lecture.
So thank you all. Thank you especially Shelley. Thank you especially Dorit. It was a great session. It was both of papers were so well connected, and we can see how you both are dialoguing also off stage. And it is a pleasure to be here, and we will meet on the other side of the break.
So we can start, right?
Yes, definitely.
Great. So thank you all for joining the third session of this fascinating day that challenges our concepts or thinking habits about identity, unity, belonging, and intimacy. We will discuss additional artistic works and models of adaptation between and after the wars in Poland. And our first speaker is Professor Markus Zilber. Markus Zilber is Associate Professor at the Department of Jewish History at the University of Haifa and is former chairman, and also the director of its interdisciplinary unit for Polish studies and chairman of the Tyner Institute for the History of the Bund and the Jewish labor movement at the University of Haifa. On the core of his academic interest is the relation between citizenship and ethnicity. He has written on Jewish diaspora nationalism in Poland, Lithuania, and Russia in early 20th century, on Yiddish and Polish mass culture in interwar Poland, and on Polish-Israeli relations and neutral migrations. Today, he will speak about the Polish cabaret and the Yiddish Kleinkunst in interwar Poland. Markus, the floor is yours.
Okay, so do you see the
yes,
slides?
The presentation, yes.
You see the changing slides?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good news. Thank you, Tsafi, and thank you all of you for being here. Let me begin addressing the concept of acculturation introduced in the 60s by the American sociologist Milton Gordon, that describes a largely one-way process of acquisition and absorption of mainstream cultural norms, values, and social habits of the dominant group by a minority group. By doing that, it reflects the notion that ethnic groups have distinct cultures, and members of one ethnic group adopts the cultural patterns established by the dominant culture, which remained, in Gordon's view, basically unchanged. This concept is broadly accepted in the study of Jewish history. The historiography of Jews in modern Poland used this concept as an axiom. In the context of Jews in Poland, the Polish majority is traditionally perceived as having exerted a unilateral influence upon the smaller Jewish collective, which adopted the Polish language, habitus, and cultural practices. This is what the historian Jonathan Boyarin refers to as a hydraulic explanation of cultural change, i.e. the rise in one phenomenon, in our case, the adoption of Polish language and Polish cultural assets, contributes to the decline in another, the decline of the use of Jewish vernacular and Jewish practices. Acculturated Jews are thus perceived by others and are said to perceive themselves as less Jewish than the contemporary image of Jewishness was in that time. In other words, by unilaterally adapting themselves to a so-called given Polish cultural hegemonic majority, their original cultural distinctiveness begins to diminish. My interest herein lies in re-examining the principle on which the acculturation paradigm rests, focusing on a specific place, time, field, and case. The place and time are Łódź, Lodz, and Warsaw in the interwar period. The field is the production of a new popular and mass urban culture in economic conditions characterized by commodification of culture, focusing here in the case of the literary cabaret. The performance of some of those who engaged in Polish literary cabaret was dominated by their Jewishness. The cases of Józef Pikuś Urshtein, a popular actor that began his career in Łódź literary cabaret Bibabo in 1913, exemplifies the case of the importance of Jewishness and the Yiddish language for artists performing in Polish. Urshtein worked in Łódź Bibabo with both Konrad Tom, the well-known cabaret writer and performer, and also with the famous songwriter Andrzej Włas, three figures that will collaborate during the interwar period in Warsaw's literary cabarets. In the legendary Qui Pro Quo, already mentioned today, the literary cabaret par excellence, or in Morskie Oko, another important literary cabaret in interwar Warsaw, and in others. Despite the emphasis scholars place on their Jewish cultural background, when analyzing their work, they are considered assimilated. In the case of others, Jewish motives in their work only formed a fraction of their professional career, as in the case of the Kleinkunst cabaret artist Ola Lilith, who performed in Yiddish and Polish. For many others, a significant Jewish characteristic laid in the vivid way in which their social environment reminded them of it. All these figures frequently perform with non-Jews. It is perhaps less known that at the same time, they themselves were sometimes from unclear ethno-national backgrounds. Such was the case of the handsome man from film and theater, the Swiss Calvinist Eugeniusz Bodo, the son of a Lodz cabaret and cinema impresario. Or the well-known conferencier, the Czech-Hungarian Friedrich Jarosi, already mentioned by Dorit, who arrived to Warsaw with the Russian cabaret Sinia Yaptichka, the Bluebird, and remained in Warsaw. Others were perceived as connected to Jews or Jewishness. Antoni Słonimski, for instance, who was born Christian to a converted father. Such a heterogeneous group of writers, musicians, and performers intersected the Jewish and Polish ethno-cultural spheres, serving as a Gilmanian frontier, the site of intercultural encounters. They elaborated together the interwar Polish cabaret, adapting and combining the Parisian chanson of the fin de siècle, social satire of Munich, Lodz Bibabo insolence, replacing the pre-war Krakow Zieloni Balonic's elitism with a program open to a broad public, transplanting the highly stylized sets of the Sinia Yaptichka, the Bluebird, to the new Polish urban reality. They also reshaped the uncouth Jewish comic characters of the Viennese cabaret, combined with the parody of the Lodgermensch, creating then a new genre that came to be known as schmonzes. Literary cabaret, the Polish literary cabaret, challenged the hegemonic notions of Polishness in an oppressive Polonocentric age. It staged its alternative, performing with a multi-ethnic cast, a repertoire that represented Polish society as a multi-ethnic entity. Hereby, it related to Polishness as a contested topic in a permanent state of construction and conflict. They transcended the small stage by selling recorded sketches and music records in the thousands. As a commodified cultural event, however, its transformation into a political possibility largely remained on the theoretical level. This performance used a Polish language characterized by bad pronunciation. It explicitly remodulated Polish in foreign accents, Hungarian, German, Russian, with foreign words and expressions, French, Yiddish, it places particular emphasis upon the Jewish way of speaking Polish. Contemporary critiques draw attention to the way in which cabaret created a particular language with its own syntax, intentional stylistic errors, word formations, and lexical neologisms. Every term representing a concept, as the literary critic, playwright, and translator Tadeusz Boy-Zieleński wrote in 1924. Reviewers repeatedly notes its popularity and infectious character, citing off-stage examples that are almost impossible to translate. Not surprisingly, the Polish Academy of Literature, the establishment gatekeeper of the purity and beauty of the Polish language, launched an official campaign against the language of the Szmonces in September 1936 that led to their censorship in Warsaw. Many contemporaries portray this new popular culture as an alien zajidzenie, Judaization of Polish culture, and in some way the talk of Agata echoed this trend. What I am trying to say is this particular layer of society lying in the social cultural frontier thus created something unprecedented in the Polish cultural arena, staging a variety of accents, experiment with a new language. They challenged essentialist concepts of language and nationality, presenting a subversive alternative to the Polish-Jewish dichotomy. Wrote Słonimski, I cite, "The law and the constitution allow secularity. Could it possible that secularity is forbidden in the case of national matters? Is it really necessary to love just one of the two chosen nations, i.e. the Polish or the Jewish? Too little choice, gentlemen." Instead of acculturating themselves to a given Polish culture, these Jews constituted, together with people from other denominations and ethno-cultural backgrounds, a new, distinctive, unique mixture of counter-cultural assets. In this regard, this particular case suggests that rather than accommodating themselves to Polish culture, Jews, whether or not they identified as such, were co-constitutive of a new cultural entity. Moreover, without the Jews, there would have been no such Polish popular culture. They jointly produced new cultural assets with their fellows non-Jewish artists. So it cannot be said that they have acculturated themselves to themselves. Polish literary cabaret also reshaped popular Yiddish culture. Where is my, okay. The sophisticated Yiddish Kleinkunsttheater was partially modeled on the Polish language literary cabaret. The first attempt to found the Yiddish Kleinkunsttheater was made at the end of 1919 by the avant-garde artistic group Young Yiddish in Lodz. It was a one-time performance by Moishe Brothers, Sunshine and Miriam, Itzhok Vincenti Breuner, Honech Kohn, Dina Matos, and other people close to Young Yiddish. As in the performance of the genre in contemporary Łódź and Warsaw, it included dance, declamation, and popular music. They performed in a place that was 15-minute walk from the place where Bibabo performed. While there is no testimonies about the group members attending Bibabo shows, we do know that some of them kept close personal and professional contacts with people involved in Bibabo performance, and later on with them when they moved to Warsaw and performed in the new literary cabaret in Warsaw. A second attempt to create an Yiddish equivalent of the Polish genre was in 1922 when ex-members of Young Yiddish created the first Yiddish marionette theater in Poland, Hadgadie. The premiere was in Warsaw and they performed irregularly in Warsaw and Łódź. The Daily Lodger Talkblad stated that this theater imitated the well-known Polish opera that last year did a lot of noise, combining in its repertoire socio-political satire. Shortly after, Broderson tried again to establish a Yiddish literary cabaret in which the Shora bore. Finally, Moshe Broderson founded in 1926 in Warsaw the first Yiddish Kleinkunst theater, Azazel. Reviewing its premiere, Menachem Kipnis, the Yiddish Daily Hind theater and music reviewer, wrote, "Yes, indeed, a Yiddish qui pro quo, a Yiddish perskie oko could be created in Warsaw." His insight was absolutely, even literally correct. Many performers themselves coming straight from the Polish literary cabaret cast. The conferencier was Władysław Godik, an experienced artist of the cabaret genre on the Polish stage. The principal star, his wife, Ola Lilith, a qui pro quo singer. Through their skills, they brought their experience in the Polish language literary cabaret to the Yiddish stage. Godik and Lilith performed for many years with the stars of Qui Pro Quo in Polish and on the Yiddish stage simultaneously, such duality coming naturally to them. The transfers was neither one-directional nor limited to a sole occasion. Many other Polish language cabaret artists and actresses performed together with Yiddish actors for the Yiddish-speaking public, going back and forth from the Yiddish and the Polish stage. Leo Fuchs, who began his career in the Gimpel Yiddish Theater in Lwów, performed in Warsaw Qui Pro Quo and became later one of the biggest stars of Yiddish theater in the United States. Dora Kalinowna, a star of Qui Pro Quo, performed in Yiddish in Warsaw and abroad. The well-known Lodz actor Bolesław Norski-Nożyca, for example, performed in Yiddish in the Kleinkunst Warsaw Theater Azazel and at the Lodz-based Ararat, while at the same time also performing in Polish elsewhere. In 1927, Moshe Broderson established and directed the very popular Kleinkunst Ararat, and I come here commenting something that relates to the important research made by colleagues here, by Diego and Zeavit, and Broderson modeled the Ararat in which he modeled it at least partially after the contemporary Polish language literary cabaret that performed also in which, in its performance, were covered by the local Yiddish press. Broderson introduced in the Ararat show many elements present in the contemporary Qui Pro Quo. For instance, he introduced political sketches similar to those on the Qui Pro Quo or Morskie Oko stage, challenged the Yiddish normative stage language along the lines of Qui Pro Quo by employing the Lodz Yiddish dialect. He did that when standardization of Yiddish has been a highly controversial issue discussed around the foundation of the Yiddish Institute in Vilna. In this regard, this choice reflects the Qui Pro Quo rejection of standardization and purity of language in favor of a dynamic, colloquial, controversialist language. Broderson introduced a sarcastic leitmotiv song a la Qui Pro Quo into the Ararat show, in line with the principal song in Qui Pro Quo, which premiered in February 1926, a kind of cabaret ode. Broderson composed a parallel song for Ararat, the Ararat ode, which was performed at each and every Ararat performance. Both odes convey a message of despair and an identical solution. In Yiddish, after the deluge, there is no art. In Polish, how can we go any further with the words? As a means of dealing with this despair, both songs suggest going to the literary cabaret. We swim to Ararat in Yiddish. We go to Qui Pro Quo in Polish. The melody of the Ararat ode was so popular among the Polish-speaking audience that Polish lyrics were created to that music, and that reflects the dynamic transference in the popular culture and noticed in general in the research. As it's well known, Broderson was also responsible for discovering Szymon Gigan and Israel Schumacher, the most celebrated Jewish comedy team in Poland that Diego wrote broadly about them. While their performance reflected various models from the contemporary silver screen, Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin, they also transferred the acts of Konrad Thom and Józef Pikuś Urstein in their schmonzes from the Polish language cabaret to the Yiddish stage. On the one hand, Ararat's performances were reviewed in Polish in a Łódź publication, not exclusively Jewish. On the other, the Yiddish press reported that performers of the Polish literary cabarets went to see Ararat. Hind observed that the Polish literary cabaret star Zula Pogorzelska attended Ararat's Yiddish shows. It was also reported that Kazimierz Krukowski and Konrad Thom laughed their heads off, both being familiar with the Yiddish language. According to Hind, the Ararat shows Mires und Loction remained them of the golden age of qui pro quo. Gigan also worked in Polish in the Teatr Popularne in Berka Jozelewicza Street, today Ogrodłowa Street, vis-a-vis Poznanski's Palace and Industrial Complex, 800 meters from his native theater. On the Polish stage, he performed in Polish, Jewish characters from the classic Malka Schwarzenkow and Jojne Firulkes by Gabriela Sapolska. So, this Yiddish cabaret, as a reflection of the Polish one, makes it difficult to maintain the acculturation paradigm that suggests that in the process of acculturation, the acculturated Jew became less Jewish, according to the contemporary notion of Jewishness, when adopting habitus and cultural patterns of the dominant culture. To summarize, a group of artists, Jews and non-Jews, on the socio-cultural frontier transferred elements from other cultures into an ostensibly clear-cut Polish or Jewish culture. Ostensibly, because the examples presented here evince that the cultural change did not only take place within the smaller group, the Jewish minority. When new values and practices were adopted, the cultural features of both collectives were affected by their mutual encounter. This is incommensurate with the passive unidirectional linear process implicit in the acculturation paradigm. Hereby, a unique mix of original, countercultural, Polishness and Jewishness arose in the field of commodified mass culture. By the outbreak of World War II, many elements of Polish and Yiddish popular culture had become a singular Polish-Jewish blend that frequently also resisted its symbiotic nature, according to the nationalist discourse of those era. While the peculiar process of cultural transference helped integrate two publics, it also fueled a Blumian anxiety of influence that, again, was presented in some way in Agata's paper. This anxiety also ostensibly recreated two separate mass cultural spheres that stem from a political ideological view of the first part of the 20th century, united as well by the denial of the transfers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. We have only a short time, but if you have questions or comments, now is the time. Shelley? We can't hear you.
Sorry. Marcus, it was fascinating. Thank you. If you could speak a little bit more about the resistance of influence and what was the praxis of that.
Okay. Well, I think that the best example of resistance is the I would say even the refuse of the people to recognize the transference, to mention it, to tell that they are going to this theater. And also it is reflected in the discourse of the contemporary discourse that only used to see the legitimate performance was when it's done in our language and not reflecting this cross participation. And I think that in what I am thinking, basically, and maybe is again follows some of the ideas that I catch and at the end from Ruti's paper, is that we are using two axes: this local Yiddishist, the Welt, this Yiddish world, as one axis, and the other axis is the transnational Jewish theater. But the axis which use to frequently ignore is the axis that is so close geographically, but denied by the nationalist discourse of the period that we are repeating when we are ignoring that. That is the reason I mentioned how close the performance were done. We know that they met in the streets, they commented in some ways, or in some cafe in the middle of two theaters. The comments that are doing, by the way, it's because each one of the figures tried to frame itself as, in the core of the old tradition as Zogerin or as Purimspieler, but in the inner tradition.
Thank you, Zehavit, and then Diego, please try to be brief.
So thank you, Marcus. This is really enlightening. And I also liked how this ties into the previous panel with Shelley and Dorit. So in all cases, we see how the theater and popular theater allows for a more hybrid, open space that doesn't tie into the dichotomies like Zionism, diaspora, or Polish and Jewish. And my question to you is whether you think it's very interesting and very new and very important that you challenge the acculturation paradigm. But I wanted to ask if you think that it's specifically in the realm of popular culture that we should resist this paradigm, or you think it's all over the place and just the case of the cabarets where we can see it more clearly?
I think the cases I am taking is the cases of popular culture, and now here I presented the question in this claim constant cabaret, literary cabaret is but I see it over all the popular culture, but not only. It is in every corner, from my point of view, things that I am seeing in the interwar Poland. I will maybe cite one of my doctoral students, Marta Dudzic-Rutkowska, that is writing about one of the most important Hasidic rabbis, very conservative in interwar Poland, which is very known, the rabbi from Piaseczno, and she is connecting through in different ways how the contemporary pedagogy shaped his pedagogy that was presented always as coming from the old traditional Jewish sources. Yes, a very conservative rabbi. That's an example only to show how this paradigm is only, we are through this paradigm, we are reproducing the discourse, not analyzing it.
Thank you, Diego.
Yes, thank you, Marcos, for the great contribution. It's great. It was great to hear and to expand also my own research through your study. I think it's great. I think it's there is also important to mention that also Schumacher's wife, Celina Stahl, I think I mentioned that in the book, she was actually acting as well in the Polish theater and in Ararat theater, and she actually translated into Polish one of Goldfaden's pieces, and Schumacher actually directed it. But I think that in the case of Broderson, I think also the influence of the Russian theater is very important to mention, and not only the Polish one. And yes, this dialogue was also very important in the visual arts, also actually through the other artists that were not performers, that were also collaborating and having influence, also through the art schools and of course.
I agree with you. That is the reason I say largely and not totally.
Yeah.
I couldn't come into all the details. And also I mentioned this Sinia Ptica, that also is often mentioned as but yes, of course. But I think that in the case of Broderson, again, he came to Moscow from Łódź and spent the years of the revolution in Moscow. And he was exposed to what was going on in Moscow. But he interpreted what is going on in Moscow through his own experience from the pre-World War I period. That is not reproducing. He's interpreting what is going on in Moscow, bringing it back to, bringing with him back his Łódź Lodge interpretation of what is going on in Warsaw, replanting it in this Yiddish culture. He was very involved in Yiddish culture, and it's a fascinating figure. It is a lot to write. It is this interesting biography by Gilles Roger, but it is a lot to write about Broderson, again, in light not only the way he wanted to present himself as a, as a Yiddish Kulturtour or Klaltour, yeah? But also in light of what is going on around him, physically around him in Lodz.
Great, thank you very much. And we move on. Our next speaker is the.
Okay, so thank you everyone for a fascinating day. I know that I'm left with much to think about. Thank you for your engagement and for your participation, and have a nice weekend.